Hi everyone, Clint Edmondson with Microsoft. In this screencast, we're going to talk about modeling the business domain using conceptual class diagrams. But first, a little business context. This screencast series follows along the creation of a solution for Tailspin Toys. They're a small brick-and-mortar hobby shop that sells model airplanes, and they're looking for an online storefront to supplement in-store sales. So let's talk a little bit about what a conceptual class diagram is. It's also known as a domain model or an analysis class model. The idea is we're going to explore domain concepts and begin assigning responsibilities. We're going to develop a consistent vocabulary of business concepts and terms. These will be used throughout the requirements model. And we're also going to use these when communicating between the application and users in things such as message boxes or other on-screen prompts. This model will also describe the types of information used within the system and also that data and information exchanged with other systems. And finally, this is independent of the requirements gathering method you may use. This works equally well with use cases, user stories, or other standards such as SRS requirement styles. Let's briefly talk about the analysis steps we're going to perform. First, we're going to identify the key terms used in our domain as data or data type elements. We're going to use these classes as nouns when writing the requirements. And we're going to use enumerations to define literal values or states used in business processes. And finally, we're going to iterate and refine this model as new requirements are captured. This is not meant to be something static. It's meant to be continually used throughout your development lifecycle while you're gathering requirements. So let's switch over to Visual Studio and start building some conceptual class diagrams. If you've been following along in the screencast series, you'll remember some of the earlier diagrams we've created. We've got our brainstorming workshop where we identified some of the actors and some of their features they'd like to see implemented. We also took a deep dive into the customer and looked at some of the specific use cases, as well as the store manager. So based on what we've seen in these two use case diagrams, we've got a pretty good inkling for some of the initial nouns in our system. You can see some of those: toys, shopping cart, wish list. We've also got the actors themselves, customers and registered customers. Same thing over here with store managers, processing orders, canceling orders, managing inventory. So we've got some ideas for some of the nouns. So let's start to put together a domain model. Let's create a new item, UML class diagram. We'll call it domain model. And we've got a nice clean design surface here. So right off the bat, we know we're going to have customers. Let's go ahead and throw that in here. You know what I'm going to do is we're going to stick at just the noun level. We're not going to worry about their attributes or operations. So let's go ahead and collapse this. We had a shopping cart. We had a wish list. Collapse these down. And we had an order. And down below all those are all related to toys, so we'll put that down at the bottom. Our toy, we'll use the singular form. All right, now that's a good enough start to begin discussions with our customer. So here's some of the entities we've analyzed based on our initial requirements so far. So we show this to our customer, and right off the bat they say, you know what, shopping carts have to have individual items in them because they're going to be shopping and adding toys to their cart. So let's go ahead and add an entity to describe shopping cart items. And once they commit a purchase, they'll also have order line items. Remember, these terms are coming straight from our customer. We are not determining it ourselves. We're not solving the problem yet. We're still trying to understand the scope of the nature of the problem we want to solve. And I think that looks pretty good for now. So, you know, we've gone around and around with our customer and talked about this several times, and these are kind of the natural nouns that are falling out of the system. So let's build some relationships between these. Let's talk about how they relate to each other. So naturally, a customer will have a shopping cart. Customer will have a wish list. And at some point in time, the customers are going to place orders. As we discussed earlier, shopping carts will have shopping cart items. So go ahead and throw those together. As a result of purchasing a shopping cart, the orders that will result will have order line items. And ultimately, both wish lists, shopping cart items, and order line items all point back to toys. And there we have it, a nice, small, consistent domain model. Now notice it's a little busy, so let's clean this up a little. First, let's go ahead and remove some of the arrows. We don't necessarily need those right now. So let's go in here, change this navigable to false. Do that real quick on all these, just to get some of this noise out of the way. A little too hard to follow right now. Okay, there we go. Notice as we drew those associations, it put in some multiplicities, one-to-ones for everything. That's the default. So let's kind of walk through this and adjust this as necessary. So a customer, talk it over with our client, and yeah, a customer can only have one wish list at a time, so we'll leave that as a one-to-one. Customers and shopping carts, yeah, one-to-one here as well. Customers and orders, you know what, we ultimately want our customers to place many orders, so let's go ahead and change that one to a one-to-many. So notice here our first role says customer, our second role is order. We'll open up our second role where we set the navigation, and we will change that multiplicity. Our choices are here, 0 to 1, 1 star, 1 to star. Well, if a customer who's never purchased anything will not have any orders in their system yet, so we will go ahead and use star, which means 0 to n. Order line items, as long as we're in here, that second row. Now we talked it over with our customer, or our client, and they said it has to be at least one item in an order. And while having that discussion, you know what, the shopping cart needs at least one item as well. So we'll change that multiplicity, 1 star. And notice this is going in a fairly nonlinear order. I'm discovering this as I talk this over with my customer or with my client, and I'm filling this in. So this is an iterative process where you continually refine your model. What we got at this point, I think, is a fairly decent model representing the shopping. Now this will grow over time as we get further and further into other iterations, but we're focusing really on what we decided we'd implement in the first iteration or sprint, which is strictly just shopping and placing an order. So this kind of represents what we thought we might need. After discussing it with the customer, they decided, you know what, we're going to hold off on wish lists. That's a nice to have, but it's not necessarily something we need right now. So let's go ahead and change that color to a different color, and we'll kind of annotate that we will be implementing this in another version. So let's drop a comment on here and say out of scope for release 1.0, and we will connect that to our wish list. I think with that point we're set. So this kind of covers a high-level conceptual model. We haven't talked about any of the details. Now at some point during requirements gathering, you will want to start capturing some details so they're not lost and can be used during the implementation. And it's okay to use class diagrams for that. So let's go ahead and create another new item. We're going to create another class diagram. We're going to call that orders model. All right, we've got a nice new design surface. We will quickly flip over to our UML Model Explorer. Notice all the things we created in our domain model now show up in our Model Explorer. So we're going to talk about orders because we've got some specific information our customer wanted to make sure we capture. So let's go ahead and create an order. We'll drag in the order line items. And notice our relationship from our domain model was preserved. So let's start adding some attributes as our client is describing them to us. We're going to click on attributes. We're going to hit enter. And obviously there will be a customer associated with an order. We'll hit enter again. That customer will have a billing address. We need a date for the order, so order date. We will also have a ship date as this order is fulfilled. We'll have the total cost of the order. We'll have the shipping cost for the order, which naturally begs a question, what's the shipping method? We're starting to get a little big here, so let's spread them out. And shipping method brought up a nice discussion. Well, it turns out there are only a fixed number of shipping methods, so let's go ahead and define those here in our domain model as a quick enumeration. So I'll drag this on here and call it shipping method, shipping methods, and highlight literals and hit enter. And it turns out there are 3 methods. They're ground, overnight, and 2-day delivery. Let's go ahead and associate that so we don't forget. So our shipping methods are associated with that enumeration. Let's take the line off of here because it's really not relevant. There we go. And in this case, we're going to call that second part of the relationship, that second role, we're just going to call it shipping method. I think I can do that right here. Let's double click, change that. So just to show the nature of this. So in this case, since that's an enumeration, there is no property on shipping methods that points back to an order, but there is a shipping method property from order that is described by these enumerations. So I'm going to clear that out. So there we go. That's a nice start. Let's go down to line item and do some of the things down here as well. So I will highlight attributes, right click and say add new attribute. Just another way to do that. We'll talk about the price, enter the quantity we want to order, the SKU, which obviously comes from the toy that's being purchased. And let's see, how about the item weight? We want to ultimately calculate that shipping, so we're going to need the item weight as well. Another thing we may want to do is when we're talking about item weight, since we are talking in domain terminology, let's go ahead and put a little refinement in there. Let's say that's in pounds, so we know that we're dealing with units in pounds. Again, this is for analysis purposes. We're not getting into solving the problem yet, so we're not talking about solution-specific types. In fact, I'm not putting any types in here at all. This is really just to get our feel for what the problem space is. If there are specific types that need to be captured, it's okay to do that. So order date, if I wanted to come in here and capture that in a nice tight format, I could certainly put in a date as well. Same thing here. But again, you only want to do this if you need to. Shipping cost, F2. Go to the end, and this is dollars. All right, we're keeping this completely in the terminology of the client as well as the customers themselves. All right, at that point, we've got a nice start on that. Obviously, this will continue to be refined as we go, but I wanted to give you a feel for what both a high-level domain class diagram looks like, and then if you needed to start doing some detailed capture of some of the requirements as well. So you've seen how to build a high-level conceptual class diagram as well as a class diagram capturing some of the details that our customer is concerned about. Let's talk about a few domain modeling tips. Remember, always use friendly names. It's okay to use spaces, avoid abbreviations unless they are abbreviations that are standard to the domain space that our customer is familiar with. Show just those classes needed in the descriptions of the requirements. You're not trying to solve the problem, so don't build out things you don't need. The conceptual class diagram we created was driven strictly from the use case diagram as well as some of the details during discussions with our customers. Focus on names and simple relationships via associations. Don't get too hung up on whether something is an aggregate or a composition. That can come later in detailed design. And also don't get hung up on the multiplicities. Remove them if necessary. The point is really to capture the glossary or the terminology in your customer's terms. If you do capture those multiplicities, make sure you do that strictly to clarify the relationships. Don't feel the need to clarify that for every possible diagram you do, only those where it's important or it becomes important during the writing of the requirements. Add attributes and types only if they're needed to clarify the requirements. Again, you're refining the requirements here. You're not trying to solve the problem yet. So add those attributes and stick with the standard primitives, booleans, strings, numbers, and then add domain-specific types only if they add clarity. So for example, I've got two here, temperatures in degrees Celsius or duration in terms of weeks. We want to capture what's in the mind of our client. And always, always stay implementation independent. Don't assign the visibilities, public, protected, private. That's absolutely an implementation detail and can come later. Also avoid modeling keys or unique IDs. Those are an implementation detail as well. And try to avoid modeling verbs, actions, or operators and functions. We're really just trying to capture the nouns and trying to create a glossary of terms that are used by the requirements. I've got some great references for you for this screencast: domain-driven design, analysis patterns, and use case-driven object modeling with UML. All three of these books offer great examples of the domain models we've talked about, great guidance on how to think about them, how to draw them, how to discuss them with your clients. As for resources, all the models created in this screencast were drawn using Visual Studio 2010 Ultimate. You can download the trial at this link provided here. The architecture team also maintains a blog at blogs.msdn.com/vsarch. And you can visit my blog for these materials. I'm at www.notsotrivial.net. Thanks for tuning in.